Hi, good morning, everybody. Uh, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Bob Flynn. I'm a instructor here at Palo Alto Networks. I'm an old timer here. I've been here working on my ninth year now. Uh, I began I started my career here at Palo Alto Networks when really we only had one product. We had a firewall. We had our next generation firewall. And then we began making new products, things like Panorama for managing multiple firewalls. We've acquired different companies. We've moved into the cloud. We've done a lot of things. So it's been exciting times here. One of the big exciting moves that we've made is our SASE solution, which actually has two components to it that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about uh, first of all, what is SASE? It's one of those acronyms, one of those terms. What does it mean? Well, we're going to talk about it. Uh, we're going to talk about how we are able to uh, solve multiple problems with two basic approaches that people have had problems with for a long time. The idea of how do you secure and give good performance to people in small branch offices, remote offices, that sort of thing, as well as mobile users. How do you treat that? Well, and that space has exploded over the last couple of years with COVID and the pandemic and all that sort of stuff. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the two components of our SASE solution, or the two main components, which is Prisma Access and Prisma SD-WAN. And then we're going to discuss a few use cases and a few successes to kind of help folks understand how this all can help folks. So first of all, the idea is we got to know what SASE is. So what is SASE? Well, it's Secure Access Service Edge. It's an acronym. If you've been around for a while, like I have, you've seen things move from a idea that you have a data center and a place where all of your servers and all of your information and all of your important stuff is inside a single perimeter, and all you have to do is guard that perimeter, and when bad folks come in, you try to stop them. Well, that's no longer the case. What we have now is we have a situation where most of your information is not inside your perimeter. You know, you got your software as a service, your SaaS applications, where you've got Box, you've got Office 365, you use Salesforce, you've got G Suites, you've got all Dropbox and Box and all kinds of different applications you use. And you've got important proprietary information there that is no longer inside your perimeter. So you have to protect that. How do you protect stuff that's outside of your traditional perimeter? You've also got public cloud, right? You access, say, LDAP or Active Directory in the cloud. It's no longer in your data center anymore. You've got different applications. You've got different drives. You got different things that are up in the public cloud, and Amazon and Azure and Google Cloud, and there are several different providers for that. And you've also got the idea of multiple different branch offices and remote offices and storefronts and those sort of things that you have to protect that are again are outside of your traditional data center. And of course, in the last 2 years, the explosion of mobile users. The idea was, you know, a couple years ago, maybe 10 or 20% of your user base was mobile sales folks and all that sort of stuff, uh, traveling and going to customer sites and that sort of thing. But everybody else was sitting inside the data center. And as they went out to the internet, they would go through firewalls and all that sort of stuff. So you only had to worry about this 10% of folks. Well, that has changed, obviously. I imagine that 75% of the people that we're talking about are mobile users now. You're sitting at home or you're maybe still traveling, who knows? But the explosion of mobile users has been exponential over the last couple of years. And trying to keep pace with that has been a difficult problem. So these two things, the regional branch offices and the mobile users, are big problems that our SASE solution provides solutions for. So let's look at that. Traditionally, what happens, or what did happen, is that for users in branch offices, like say New York and Chicago here, when they had to talk to each other, they would go back to the main data center. And in that main data center lies all of the security solutions, your firewalls and your IPsec solutions and all those sort of things. And if I had a user in a branch office in Chicago, I had to talk to a user in New York, well, they would go all the way back to wherever the big data center was, in this case, California. And then they go to New York with a dedicated lease line or an MPLS line or an IPsec tunnel or something like that. So it'd be secure communication, but everything had to go through and be backhauled to that main data center in California here. Well, the idea would be for efficiency and good user experience would be, well, why can't they just talk to each other? Why do they have to go all the way back to California? Well, the problem is to make that happen, you would need to have some sort of a security stack, some sort of security solution to take care of this back and forth traffic. That's very expensive. That costs a lot of money. We're talking about 6 or 7 figures in each of these different branch offices. That's pretty expensive. So you end up having to rely on a single large security stack somewhere in a big data center, and you got to live with this high latency. And if a user has to go out to the internet, which is where things are these days, no longer, as we were talking about, do you really have your data and your information and stuff like that inside a data center? Well, it's all up on the internet. It's in the cloud. It's all those places. So all of a sudden, instead of having most of your traffic going to a data center, most of it's going out to the internet. And what's the shortest path? Well, it's not going halfway around the country and then going out to the internet. The shortest path is straight out to the internet. That's what you want to achieve. So for users in remote offices and branch offices, this is a big player. This is a big problem. Poor user experience, and it's actually not very scalable. The second big problem is mobile users, and this has exploded over the last 24 months, right? Over the last 2 years, while we've been in the middle of this pandemic, the COVID and all of this, is now you got users all over the place that are having to work remotely, sitting in their homes, trying to get work done, all that sort of stuff, and they have to dial in and go to the main data center through a remote access VPN, whatever flavor it might be, whatever vendor it might be. And all traffic that is bound to the internet has to first go back to the main data center before it can go out to the internet. Much like our remote office users, our branch office users, it's the same sort of thing. And during this rapid scale up of mobile users during the pandemic, the big issue was that all of these enterprises had to scale up and buy a whole bunch of new equipment, buy huge new internet links to scale up to support all these mobile users. When they moved from, say, 10% of their user base to 100% of their user base being remote, it is, well, it's a lot of things. It's bulky and not agile. It took a lot of time for many enterprises to support a bunch of mobile users that they didn't expect to have. These things also lead to inconsistent security. So if you're going to send your branch users or your mobile users straight out to the internet and only rely on endpoint security, you're missing a lot of stuff. It's expensive. So you have to either make sure all traffic goes through a central location where you have a firewall and security solution, or you got to provide it at all these branch offices and for all these remote users in their house, which can be expensive. And probably most importantly, it leads to poor user experience. And what happens when a user has poor experience? They can't get out to the internet, they can't get to this site, they can't get to that site, everything's slow. Well, they figure out a way to circumvent and go around the security solution that you have provided for them. And when that happens, users get breached, confidential information gets breached, personal identification, PII information, healthcare information, HIPAA information, whatever it might be, gets revealed, and then that company ends up on the evening news. Well, nobody wants that to happen. So the cure for all this is basically eliminate the poor user experience and all these other things so that people follow your security solution. And one of the big drivers of this, and one of the big cost savers of this, has been to update the idea of having to buy physical equipment and physical things to be able to provide networking like routers and switches and stuff like that, as well as security solutions, firewalls and IPS solutions and DLP solutions and all those sort of things, and save your customers the capital expense of buying this expensive stuff. We're talking about 6, 7, 8 figures to roll this stuff out. Well, you can't do that for all. You can't spend 6 or 7 figures on 1,000 branch offices. You can't do that for 10,000 or 100,000 mobile users or people at home, that sort of thing. The idea of the Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE, is to give you all of these solutions in a simple manner and minimizing the security products you have to manage and giving you consistent security across all these locations by selling this as a service. It's something you subscribe to, not something you buy. So all the things you traditionally did with routers and your SD-WAN solutions and your switches and your IPsec VPNs and SSL and all that sort of stuff, you can now do as a service. You don't have to spend the money to implement this with hardware. You subscribe to it. And all the security that you're used to with Palo Alto networks, decryption, user ID, app ID, traditional threat protection, zero-day threat protection with Wildfire, URL filtering, endpoint protections with Cortex, SaaS protections, and all those sort of things that traditionally you did with a piece of hardware, you can now subscribe as a service. No capital expenditures, and your operating expenses are much lower because, well, you're not buying this stuff, and you're not paying a group of people to babysit and administrate all of this hardware. All of that is moving over to the vendor, in this case, Palo Alto Networks. So as I mentioned, SASE is comprised of 2 components, Prisma Access and Prisma SD-WAN. And there's a lot of other add-ons for this, but these are the 2 core components. So we're going to start with talking about Prisma Access. And when we began this, we talked about the 2 big challenges. People in branch or remote offices having to go back and be backhauled across the country, halfway around the world, whatever the case may be, to a data center where they could be secure and their security stack lived. Well, we want to fix that. And the idea is we can basically take that security that was halfway around the country, halfway around the world, and we have the idea of being able to take that security and bring it closer to that branch office, to that remote office, to that storefront, whatever the case may be, using what we call an RNSPN, a remote network security processing node, SPN security processing node. And as the name suggests, it does security processing. I like to think of these as a firewall in the cloud. And just like any physical implementation of firewalls on premise, we will deploy them in HA pairs. Customer doesn't have to do anything to make that happen. These SPNs, these security processing nodes, have all of the same features and functions that you expect to find in PAN-OS. Decryption, uh, security policy rules for allows and denies, URL filtering, threat protections, wildfire, all of those sort of things. But the idea is you're not paying to have all of this in a bunch of branch offices. You no longer have all that money that you're spending. What you do is you deploy these close to these different branches, these different locations, and you just subscribe to this stuff as you need it. You allocate bandwidth, you do all that sort of stuff. You guys are going to find out about all of the details of this stuff as you go along through this course and through your journey here at Palo Alto Networks. The second big piece is for mobile users. So remember, we got everybody sitting at home now. They used to go to the office. They don't go to the office anymore. They got to get out to the internet. And we can basically do the same idea is we can have what we call MU-SPNs, mobile user SPNs, that are deployed in locations close to your users. And again, you got PAN-OS there to secure your users with security policy rules, decryption, the IPS solutions, wildfire, decryption, all those things that you expect to see on PAN-OS. There are some other pieces that you're going to learn about, including portals and what we call CANs, corporate access nodes. As you go along and as you finish your journey and talk about Prisma Access, all these different solutions, but basically the idea of portals is that they are the traffic cops that direct your mobile users either to the internet or to a specific security processing node or to a remote office security processing node. So the idea is that there are lots of different components here within Prisma Access to help you out. By the way, just to remind folks, or actually not remind folks because we hadn't mentioned this yet, but just to mention this, there's a QA function within the webinar, and that would be the preferred method to use to ask questions. Those can be answered as I'm speaking or maybe at the end. But there was a question about tunnels for mobile users, Prisma Access, and that sort of thing. All connections, whether it's a user in a branch office or a mobile user that's connecting into Prisma Access, is going to use an IPsec tunnel for secure communication. Additionally, they're going to have those security processing nodes to give you security. So it all kind of works together. Now, there's obviously lots of web-based solutions out there that your mobile users and your remote network users are going to need to access, including things such as Zoom and Google Cloud and Splunk and ServiceNow and all these sort of things that can be difficult to implement with these different SASE solutions traditionally. We've got the idea of CloudBlades to help your customers be able to deploy this stuff easily. It's the easy button to be able to implement ServiceNow for trouble tickets, or forwarding logs to Splunk, or Zoom conferences and Microsoft Teams, all that sort of stuff, or to protect people as they're going up to the cloud in AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, or whatever the case may be. And a lot of this stuff is integrated with Prisma Access and Prisma SD-WAN with our SASE solution, and through APIs, and using simplified menus to do that. Prisma Access and Prisma SD-WAN are two separate subscriptions, two separate services that your customers can implement and subscribe to, with two different interfaces. However, they can be joined together very easily with our app switcher, where a customer that has subscriptions to both of these solutions, and many do, they're both very popular, and many customers buy both. And you can switch back and forth using our app switcher to do that. It's a great tool. There is the ability to manage Prisma Access, which is the solution we've been talking about for mobile users and branch offices, via Panorama for customers that already have Panorama and are managing their firewalls that way, or through a web GUI. And Prisma SD-WAN also uses a web GUI, what we call the web-based model, to be able to control all of the different endpoints and pieces of Prisma SD-WAN. Speaking of Prisma SD-WAN, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about it. So the first generation solution to fix the issue of having to backhaul all traffic through a lease line or an MPLS or in a dedicated line before it can get out to the internet or back to another branch was SD-WAN. And use case of SD-WAN, or the implementation of SD-WAN, meant you had to have one or many edge devices, routers or something like that, or a dedicated SD-WAN box at every office that would send all the traffic back to the main data center, backhaul it before it could get anywhere. Now, that was an improvement upon the old MPLS or lease line or dedicated link, because now you could use IPS providers with VPN links and stuff like that to give you a little bit better performance and give you more reliability and give you multiple paths. But the traditional SD-WAN solutions rely on the router approach. They are forwarding packets. They're not session-based or session-aware or flow-aware devices, but traditionally. And so your performance and your insight is limited to things like packet loss and jitter and round trip times, things like that. They're very difficult traditionally to deploy. Using your traditional router infrastructure or buying new infrastructure to support this, having to get on the command line and having to have experts and teams of experts to be able to do this at everywhere throughout the world or throughout the continent that you're on, You either are buying very expensive labor to do this and flying them all over the place to implement this, or uh, you can't do it. And it's very complex. There's lots of different products. You know, you got your SD-WAN infrastructure, you got your overlay infrastructure, your underlay infrastructure, you got your routing, you got your security, you got all these different pieces and parts that are very difficult to implement. And it becomes very cumbersome. The idea of Prisma SD-WAN is to remove that, to take all of the configuration and all of the management that used to be at every single site and move it in the cloud. One centralized location to protect all of the stuff that might be at a branch office or a regional office or a sales office or whatever, including users and IoT devices like security cameras and card swipers and all those sort of things. Point of sale devices for people that are swiping credit cards, all those sort of things. And give these branch users access to everything they need, whether it's the internet or their SaaS applications, you know, like Salesforce and all that sort of stuff. Talking to other branches, getting back to the data center, that sort of stuff, and bringing the security to the users without having them having to backhaul to the data center all the time. Get them straight out to the internet when they need to, get them to the other branches when they need to, get them to their SaaS applications when they need to, but do that without having to backhaul them all the way back to the data centers. And do this easily and autonomously. Do it without somebody having to configure these devices. Zero touch provisioning. That's a big thing with SD-WAN. What we offer is the idea of application defined visibility. So you can see not just what's going on with packet loss and stuff like that, but what's going on with application A versus application B versus application C. And we can choose different paths for these different applications. The idea of SD-WAN is you have multiple paths. You may have your traditional MPLS links and lease links, but now you can use business IPS, ISP providers. You can use consumer ones. You can use 3G, 4G, 5G, and we can automate the idea of what path to use for which applications based on the cost, whether it's cost financially, what's least or more expensive, or if we're talking about cost in terms of usability and user experience, what's the best performance versus the worst performance. That could be cost also. All that can be taken into consideration. We want to make this stuff autonomous. We want to make it easy to deploy. We want to make it easy to manage. We leverage a lot of machine learning, what you might call artificial intelligence, that sort of stuff to do this. And again, let's not have to buy pieces of equipment everywhere we go. Let's make this cloud delivered and easy to manage. So when we get into layer 7 and application-based protections, now we're looking at more stuff than just packets per second and packet loss and stuff like that. All of a sudden, we can look at transaction times per application. How's application A versus application B working? We break things down into flow. We can be session aware. We can look at directionality, inbound versus outbound. There's a lot of stuff that we can look at. We can break down errors and failures by application. So now we have the ability to look at things like network transmission times, round trip times, server response times, things like that by specific applications. and be able to let you look at the performance of these specific applications. And we can automatically switch paths to give you the best path to get you from this branch office out to the internet, or out to the application you need, or out to your SaaS applications, whatever the case may be, and give you really great insight and robust reporting for these different applications, their health and performance, and how much bandwidth they're using, and who's using it, and all that sort of stuff. The other big advantage of Prisma SD-WAN versus the legacy SD-WAN solutions was that since these old solutions were not application aware, if you needed to measure the performance of, say, Salesforce versus Office 365 versus Workday or whatever, you had to have a separate device. Not a separate device in your data center, but a separate device in every single branch office to tell these applications apart, because there's really no application awareness. So if you want to say, well, how's Workday working versus Office 365, you'd have two different devices and send traffic through two different devices. Well, cumbersome, complex, hard to deploy, expensive to deploy. What we do is we have this idea of a single-sided application aware single device you can have at a branch office that is aware of all these different applications and can measure the performance and choose the best path individually for each application, each path for those applications from a branch office. All of this from a single controller, a single interface for people to manage. Easy stuff, easy to deploy, easy to use. Prisma SD-WAN uses a controller, an edge device. But the big advantage is that it's not just a single link back to a data center. And if you're going out to the internet, and most applications now are internet-based, SaaS applications and stuff like that, they don't have to all go through data center anymore. And now the idea is we can have what we call our ION devices to direct traffic back to the branch office when it needs to, but directly out to the SaaS applications or the internet or whatever they need to go to, without having to backhaul all the way back to a main data center. And that's really what we're trying to do. And the fact that we can break this down by application and be able to have individual applications take different paths to where they need to go, whether it's a data center or SaaS applications or whatever, by different paths, lower cost links, automatically, without having to deploy this and figure this stuff out manually, makes things so much easier and so much cheaper for your customers. The idea is you can determine what applications you're interested in with Prisma SD-WAN. You know, whether it's Office 365 or whatever it might be. Take all your different segments in your network, your guest network, and your finance applications, and your finance group versus your HR group versus your sales group, and segment all these different flows of traffic so that you don't have to worry about leaking or compromising PCI information or HIP information or whatever the case may be. You can prioritize different applications with different levels of priority, from low to high, platinum being the highest, bronze being the lowest, but in between you have silver and gold. And you can choose what paths are available and either restrict certain applications or certain segments of your network to use certain paths, or let Prisma Access, Prisma SD-WAN figure it out for you. I mean, it can be easily automated. The idea is it's your easy button. You can control this as much as you want to and customize as much as you want to, but out of the box, it does it for you. So who needs these SASE solutions? Who needs Prisma Access, Prisma SD-WAN, or both? We've got a couple of use cases, 3 of them actually, 3 different customer success stories using these solutions. Breaks down into 3 different groups. These are the 3 customers you're looking for. First, the hybrid work environment. This is where everybody is now. You may be going into the office 1 or 2 or 3 days a week. You may be working from home 1 or 2 or 3 days a week. You may be working from home 5 or 7 days a week, whatever the case may be. So hybrid work. The second one is cloud and digital. Well, the traditional solution for your email and your Word documents and your Office documents, stuff like that was, well, they're stored in a server in my data center. Well, anymore, they're up in the cloud. They're outside your perimeter. So you need a solution to protect that. And then, of course, branch offices that were traditionally backhauled to a main data center. Poor performance. Let's fix that. So people now expect to be able to work on whatever devices they have, wherever they're at home, in the office, a little bit of both, the hybrid idea, on the go, sitting and waiting for your oil to get changed, working on your phone, taking calls or working on documents, whatever the case may be. But hybrid work is what workers are expecting now. I don't know how many employers out there expect 100% of their workforce to return. It's not going to be 100%. It's going to be close. It's going to be much lower than that. Schlumberger is a big customer of ours that actually, in a matter of just a couple of days, was able to pivot from a low percentage of their workforce to all of their workforce working remotely, from 25,000 remote users to 80,000 remote users in days, not weeks or months or years, but days. The second is the move from traditional data centers where information was stored to SaaS and public cloud on AWS or Google Cloud, or working with your SaaS applications like Salesforce and Workday and all that sort of stuff. No longer does it make sense for traffic to be backhauled to a data center when it's going to ultimately end up in the internet, in the cloud. Let's send it directly there. Autodesk is another big customer of ours. They were able to reduce their number of data centers throughout the world from 7 down to 1 in the cloud using our SASE solution, using primarily Prisma SD-WAN and Prisma Access. And then again, the whole idea of having a distributed infrastructure. We have manufacturing plants, you got retail stores, you got branches, you got headquarters, and all that sort of stuff. Instead of sending everything again back to the data center, now you can eliminate the cost, either the links to get back to the main data center, or the cost of having to implement security and hardware at all these places by using Prisma SD-WAN and Prisma Access to give you the best way to get back and forth, and also give you the best security available. And AutoNation is another big customer of ours that was able to reduce its cost for links and traffic by $3 million a year. It was a 25% reduction in their telco costs per year, and a 10 times increase in performance by using our SaaS solutions, Prisma SD-WAN, Prisma Access. So these are the sort of situations where this solution is going to work for your customers. And that's how we're going to protect your digital way of life. So thank you for attending. If there are any questions or anything like that,